So, and there is the need for the automatic data processing to assist in this case. And this is actually where the work of my thesis is settled. So the proposal was to develop an argument mining pipeline for this use case. And argument mining means that we extract the argumentative information from unstructured natural language text, which means that we want to deliver explanations for why questions. So in the case of medical decision making, this means why should I give a certain treatment? And concretely, we were extracting the claims, evidence, and their relations between them. And to give the idea is to give a structured overview over the clinical trial. And so what are the claims made by the authors? Are they supported by the experimental results? Or are there any limitations to the trial the authors stated? And this information can then not only be used for argumentation-based decision support systems, but also as a general overview to take informed decisions in general. And the underlying data I was working on are randomized controlled trials, or short RCT. And I chose that because they are one of the highest quality evidence in evidence-based medicine. They are comparative studies, so you have at least 2 treatment arms, where one treatment arm is about the new intervention, and this is compared against either an established intervention or a placebo drug, for example. And the abstract of these published trials are freely available through PubMed. And so from this, what are the concrete research question I was addressing in my thesis? So the first question was, what is a proper argumentation framework to model clinical trials, and which information should be extracted and which information should be added to that? And consequently to that, the question is, what are proper techniques to automatically extract argument structures and analyze the found evidence. So this includes the detection of the argument components, the relation between the components, so how the argumentative structure is built, and to aggregate it with medical information to make it even more informative. And the third research question is more about the practical utility of the proposed approaches. So what exactly can the developed approaches provide? What can they not provide? Where and why do they struggle? And can their weaknesses be addressed with the current means? So to give you a quick overview of argument mining, so in general it consists of the extraction of arguments, which means you distinguish between argumentative and non-argumentative components in the text. And then you further classify the argumentative components into evidence and claims. And subsequently, you build or you try to find the relations between those components to build the argument structure. And this is a supervised machine learning task. And for this, you need training data. And since there was no training data on the scenario available, one step in my PhD was to create the own data set. And this data set was called, or is called, the Abstract data set. It is a data set comprising randomized controlled trial abstracts about treatments on neoplasm, glaucoma, diabetes, hepatitis, and hypertension, with the majority being on neoplasm. It comprises 3 annotation layers. So the first annotation layer are the argument components. So we have the evidence and the claims. The second annotation layer are the argumentative relations, which are the connections between the components, either attacking or supporting. And then this third annotation layer is the effect on outcome, which states how an intervention affects the outcome. So for example, if the overall survival was increased or decreased during the study. And we started the data collection with an already existing collection of randomized controlled trials on glaucoma data. We annotated them with the argumentative components and further added abstracts on diabetes, hepatitis, and hypertension to have out-of-domain test sets. And so the first version of the data set comprises 169 abstracts. And in the second one, we also then further added 500 abstracts on neoplasm to increase the size to a total of 660 abstracts in the second version of the data set. And to show you a quick example abstract. So here we can see the beginning is the introduction of the goal of the clinical trial, then followed by the description of the patients and experimental setup, which I skipped here for space reasons, and followed by the reports of the experimental results. And subsequently, we have the conclusion made by the author about the trial. So the question is, what exactly are we looking for? And as I mentioned, one of the major components are claims. And these are concluding statements made by the author about the study. So they can be made about just one treatment. So for example, that it was well tolerated. Also, it can be in a comparative form, so that one treatment was superior or more effective than the other. And then we have major claims, which are introductory or general claims or observation of a previous study, which needs to be confirmed. So for example, here we can see that the ATP infusion appeared to inhibit loss of weight and deterioration of quality of life. However, these major claims are rather rare in the data set, so only 3% of the components are major claims. And since they are structurally very similar to normal claims for the classification task, we merged these two labels into one class. And to judge the claims, one needs, of course, evidence. And this is the backbone of the argumentation. And these are the observation of the studies and the side effects or the measured outcome. So if we go back to the example abstract, we can see here that the measured outcomes, the report of the outcomes are now underlined and they are function as evidence. And we see that in bold on the bottom, the conclusion is the claim, which is supported by the evidence. However, here you do not see yet the relations, and the relations are an important part of the argumentation. And for this, I chose a bipolar argumentation scheme. So this means attack and support relations. And the attack relations mean that one component is contradicting the other component, or that it's undercutting its implicit assumption of significance. So for example, here we can see that the second component states that the results from the first component are not statistically significant. Then in the same direction, but not in full contradiction, we have the partial attack relation, which is more like a constraining or limiting factor. And for the argumentation, this is quite an important difference. However, for practically, again, we had to merge these two labels because we only had 2.5% attack relations and 12% partial attack relations. So again, for the classification task, they were merged into one label. And then we have on the other side the support relations, which means that the one component justifies the proposition of the target components. And so, for example, here we can see that ATP has a beneficial effect on muscle strength. And this is supported by the evidence which states that the flexor muscle strength in the ATP group did not decline. And in total, we have 2,808 evidence, 1,265 claims, 125 major claims, 2,259 support, and 342 attack relations annotated. We calculated also an inter-annotator agreement with 3 annotators after various training and reconciliation phases. And we got both substantial agreement with for the argument components 0.72 Fleiss kappa and for the component linking 0.62. And then let's move to the third annotation layer, which is the effect on outcome. And as the name let's suggest, this is how an intervention has affected the outcome. So this can either be increased or decreased. There can be no change in the outcome. There can be similar values between the two treatment arms. And then we have the improved class, which states that there was an explicit beneficial effect. So for example, from just an increased or decreased value, you cannot say that it was a beneficial effect or not. So this class explicitly mentions the beneficial effect. And then we have the no occurrence label, which states basically things which did not occur, which is also quite an important information, especially with respect to adverse drug reactions or side effects. So if they do not occur, this is important information for the doctor to evaluate the trial. And in total, we have then 3,351 outcomes annotated, and here the Fleiss kappa on 3 annotators was 0.81. So let's move actually to the argument mining pipeline. So in general, as I said, it consists of 2 parts. Here on the left, we can see then the argument component detection module, and on the right, then the relation classification. And so I start with the argument component detection. I work on that. And the first experience, or you can do that actually in 2 ways. So the first way is a sentence classification, where you classify the whole sentence as either claim, evidence, or non-argumentative. And here the goal is to find the argumentative sentences. And for a more fine-grained classification, you do a sequence tagging, so you classify each token as beginning, inside, or outside of an argument component. And here the goal is to determine the exact boundaries of the argument components, because there can be multiple components, for example, in a sentence, or a component doesn't necessarily span the full sentence. And one of the first experiments I conducted was the sentence classification task. So here the idea was to find the argumentative sentences. And for this, I relied on an existing model, which is called Margot. And this is an SVM classifier which uses subset tree kernels. And tree kernels are a measurement for similarity between trees, or in this case, syntactic parse trees. So they consider the common fragments between the two trees to calculate the similarity. And so the idea here was to detect the argumentative sentences over the syntactic structure. And additionally to the syntactic information, we also gave lexical information in form of bag of words. And as I said, the experiments were conducted on the first version of the data set. So, and in general, the models were trained on the glaucoma subset and were tested on the various other disease-dependent test sets. And we can see that for the in-domain, so for the glaucoma test set, it has the highest performance. And we can see that the difference between the bag of words and the tree kernels is higher in the claims, which means that claims might have a distinctive syntactic structure compared to evidence. And for evidence, it is actually sufficient to have the vocabulary as a discriminator, like statistical terminology or terminology related to the experimental outcome themselves. And in general, if we look here to the combined model, so if we add the tree kernels with the bag of words, we can see that there is no increase in performance. So this means that both features hold the same information content. However, these experiments, as I mentioned before, did not consider the boundary detection. So the next step was to include the boundary detection. And so this is done as a sequence tagging task with a bioscheme. For this, more neural architectures were employed together with various word embeddings and transformer models. And these experiments were conducted on the second version of the data set. And the challenges here were, again, to find the correct boundaries. So to quickly show you the employed methods, so here we have glove, fast text, and byte pair embeddings as representative for statics embeddings. So they function more as a lookup table. And they do not change the embedding with a change in context. Contrary to that, we have then Elmo, Flare, and Bird, which change the provided embedding depending on the context which is given. We also have Elmo, which is and Elmo and Flare, which were both trained on medical data to have specifically medical specific embeddings. And then for the architecture, the neural architectures, we followed the literature using RNNs. So I tested GRUs, LSTMs, and the bidirectional version of them, and also in combination with the conditional random field, which is used for structured prediction because we want to have well-formed biosequences in the output. And we also, for the transformers, I used the BERT, the base version, and then pre-trained version on scientific data and biomedical data. And if we look at the results, so we can see that for the results or the performance for the evidence is higher than for the claims, which means, again, that claims are more diverse and harder to detect, which is coherent with the previous experiments. And this means that the evidence have specific lexical cues, which differ mostly in the reported measured outcomes. And so if we look then in the horizontal direction, models trained on the neoplasm do not strongly decrease over the other tested. So if we look at the glaucoma tested, if we look at the mixed tested, there is not such a strong drop in the performance. And this supports actually the choice of choosing neoplasm as a more general, diverse disease, underlying disease for the training set, which means we could train a generalizable model. And if we look here at the embedding types, so we can see that the dynamic context-dependent embeddings like here Elmo and Flare PubMed, which were trained on the medical data, performed the best. So there is a bonus on pre-training on medical data and contextualizing. And so if we then look at the fine-tuning of the transformer, we can see a jump in performance compared to the normal word embeddings. And we can further see that the conditional random fields boost the performance, which is mostly due to the validity of the biosequences. And interestingly, we can see that also here the specialized BERT compared with bio and sci-BERT is only slightly worse. So it's in a comparable range. especially if we look at the evidence here. So meaning that there might not be so much domain knowledge required to detect evidence. And then we have the experiments on various shallow layers of the of BERT to make it compatible with a sequence tagging approach. And here we can see that, as I stated before, the conditional random fields improve the performance. We can also see that adding the GRU only slightly improves the results. And that's just my personal opinion, but I think this is more due to the increase in model parameters than actually the nature of being a GRU or RNN on top. So to conclude, in this section, we have seen that fine-tuning transformers is currently the best method for detecting components. Adding the RNN in the shallow layer only has a slight improvement. Claims are harder to detect and require more domain knowledge. And evidence, on the other hand, can be detected with non-specialized models. And one major problem here is the description of participants group, which are from the wording exactly the same, but they occur in the wrong or in a different position in the abstract and thus have a different function. And so let's move on to the relation classification, which works on the output of the components. And here again, two approaches were evaluated. So first, the sequence classification task where both components were combined as a combined input, classified as support, attack, or no relation. So here all possible combinations were evaluated. Then we have the multiple choice setting where we score each component pair to have a link, and we take the pair with the highest score and classify it then in the support or attack relation. And the motivation here was to have only one outgoing edge per component. And yes, so I said the goal here is to build the argument structure with the previous two methods I just explained. So we transform models were investigated, and the experiments were conducted on the second version of the dataset. And the models were compared against baselines from the literature for relation classification. So first we have a tree-LSTM and then a residual network. And the tree-LSTM did not perform so well on the abstract data, which is mostly because the authors state that it does not scale well with increasing text length, and randomized controlled trials can actually be quite lengthy if there are quite long descriptions of experiments. And the other baseline performed better. However, the problem here is that it's a multi-objective approach. So you have link prediction, relation classification, and component type classification in one model, which means that the model has to focus on one more task, which decreases the efficiency for each task. And similarly, this is also for the multiple choice approach, where we have on the one side we have the multiple choice setting, and on the other side we have the relation classification module, which share the same underlying transformer encoder. And if we look at the domain-specific BERTs, so BioBERT and SciBERT compared to general BERT, we can see here there is an increase. This means this task requires more domain knowledge than, for example, the argument component detection. And in general, the model could not learn a meaningful representation for the attack class, so less than 50% of the attack relations were not classified correctly. And to conclude the relation classification, so transformers are strong learners of linguistic cues we have, which outperform the current baselines. However, they still struggle with negations in the sentence, or if there are limitations stated in the components. And there's also a problem with the current version of the dataset where the attack relations are underrepresented. However, I also conducted some experiments with sampling and weighted loss functions, and this only increased the results marginally. So there might have to be a better way of modeling the components and relations classification, especially with respect to the polarity of relations. There is a need to include also domain knowledge, because increasing an outcome does not necessarily mean that it's wanted or beneficial. And so as we have seen, so the transform models were the best performing models right now, and they are also nowadays the go-to solution for various natural language processing tasks. However, the problem is in argument mining, the data sets are usually small. So you fine-tune the model on a relatively small data set, and the question is, how much can you learn from that if the model, the data set is relatively small? So how robust are they to slight linguistic variations of the input? And how do we measure that? So the idea is to create perturbations of the input data. So we changed a word in the sentence, which does not change the semantics. So the semantic of the sentence is the same. But however, this small change in the sentence actually changes the prediction of the model. And if this happens, this means the model focused or did not learn a robust understanding of the input, but rather learned or focused more on the exact wording of the input. And this is not what you want when you train a model. And so if the perturbations actually change the prediction of the model, they are called adversarial example. And the measurement for this is the success rate, so which is the number, so the number of successful attacks. So the percentage of adversarial examples over all the generated perturbations. And so practically, as I said, the idea is here to create automatically perturbations of the input data, which preserve the semantics. And for this, I tested this on a topic-dependent argument classification, since for various reasons this was not really applicable on the abstract data set to ensure the semantic preserving, because we generate these perturbations automatically. And on this task, there are two data sets, the UKP sentential argument mining corpus and the IBM debate evidence sentence corpus, where also the BERT model was state of the art. So I conducted the experiments on that. And as I said before, the challenges here are the preservation of the semantics. And so, for example, here one perturbation type was to exchange named entities with similar named entities from the semantic space. So here we replaced FBI with US Bureau of Investigation. And then we have a list of various other perturbations, which mean, so for example, we replaced the adjective with synonyms, we deleted the punctuation, we added emphasizing modal adverbs, so considerably, comparably. Then we also exchanged nouns with hyponyms, and we added adverbial conjunctions in the beginning, like furthermore, moreover, additionally. And we also, since the topic is in this model, input to the model, we also exchange topics with alternatives. So, for example, we exchanged capital punishment for death penalty or atomic power for nuclear energy. Then another perturbation was adding speculative adverbs around the verbs, so which modify the possibility property of the verbs, so like certainly or possibly. And in general, to evaluate the semantic preserving, I conducted a user study with 31 people. And in this study, the scalar adverbs and a noun replacement were perceived in more than 50% than not preserving the semantics. So especially scalar adverbs in particular, they break their grammaticality because they were assigned to the wrong position, because some of these adverbs can only occur in front, some only behind, and some can take both positions. Also, they were combined with non-scalable words like mandatory or guilty. I mean, there is no fairly mandatory. And but in general, the other perturbations reached satisfactory values between 60 and 90%. And we tested actually the attacks in 3 different scenarios. So first, the UKP corpus consists of 8 topics, and in the UKP all scenario means we use all 8 topics for training and also the 8 topics for testing. Then we have the cross topic scenario where we take 7 topics for training and 1 topic for testing. We do that for all topic combinations and take then the average over the results. And then we have the IBM cross topic. The IBM corpus is already split in a train and test set with exclusive topics. So this is also cross topic. And we can observe that for the highest success rate of attacks have been for exchanging adjective and nouns. However, in general, the more positive classes are more vulnerable to attacks. So these are the classes one mainly wants to learn, right? And the negative class, so the no argumentative class, is more like a collection of everything else. So it is quite diverse, and it's naturally more robust against the attacks. However, in general, if you look over, if I would summarize this table, so between 5 and 10% of the attacks were successful, meaning that BERT is relatively robust to slight variations in the input. However, it can be still easily fooled. And one way to make the model more robust against such attacks is adversarial training. And so here we generated the perturbations for the training from the training set and added them to the training data and retrained the model. And as we can see here, there is indeed an improvement in performance on the in-domain set, so the UKP all set. and the cross-domain, the cross-topic experience were barely affected, which means that the model did not overly focus on the training data, but actually learned a better representation of it. And so to conclude this section, actually BERT is relatively robust to variations in the input, but still it has weaknesses with respect to exchanging semantically equivalent words. And the robustness, however, can still be improved with adversarial training. So, and let's go more back to a more conceptual topic. And so let's look at the different types of evidence. Not every evidence which was extracted by the pipeline does fulfill the same function. And there are various types of evidence which are related to different facets of the trial, and thus are weighted differently in the argumentation. And the motivation for this part of the work was to find and determine a more fine-grained label which better reflects the diversity of the different evidence. So I came up with 3.5 classes to distinguish them. So the first one is the comparative class, which are evidence comparing the two arms of the clinical study. So this is to support the search of similarities in the outcomes, and is needed for the reproducibility to see what exactly was compared. And then we have the second class, which is the significance. So as the name states, it's related to statistical significance, and which is needed to measure the strength of the beneficial effect or the potential harmful outcomes of a study. And then we have the side effects, which are important to see if potential harms actually outweighs the benefits of the intervention. So if you have too many side effects, you might not want to use this treatment. And then you have the other class, which is more like a collection of other smaller classes, which would deserve their own class, but was not justifiable with the number of occurrences in the data set. So there are limitations. So limitations to the trial are important information for the generalizability of the outcome. And there are also risk factors included here, and which is also very important information. And so the annotation was conducted on the first version of the data set, with comparatively being the most prominent class and other the underrepresented. But as I said, this is more like a collection of other classes, and especially limitations and risk factors are more stated in the full body text and rarely in the abstract. So, and I also conducted experiments here with a goal to distinguish the types of evidence. And this was formulated again as a sentence classification problem, similar to the first experiments on the argument component detection. And here again, the SVM was used with lexical features, and also then later compared against GRUs with for sentence classification with various word embeddings. And the experiments were done, of course, on the first version of the data set. And to quickly show you some numbers, so the experiments were conducted in two settings. The first were on the gold standard, which means we took all the evidence and wanted to further classify them in the fine-grained labels. And on the other side, we have the whole pipeline, which means we take all the data, including the non-argumentative and claims, and classify them everything. So this is a 6-class classification problem, while the the evidence classification on the left is a 4-class classification problem. And what we can see here is that for the pure evidence classification, the n-grams perform better than the neural networks approaches, which might actually be due to the low number of training data. And in these scenarios, the SVM tends to scale better. And I can also see with respect to the generalizability of the disease that the n-grams did not as strongly drop in performance as the neural networks. So we can see here a drop from 80 to 74 and a drop from 75 to 60, which is stronger. And on the other side, if we look at the full pipeline, we can see here the neural networks start to actually use their capabilities, because there was, of course, more training data involved. And to conclude this section, then, there are various types of evidence which have to be distinguished. And some of these evidence are actually overlapping in the sense that they can belong to various types. So an extension to a multi-label approach would actually be beneficial here. However, these types refer to different facets, and they are not only necessary to for the reasoning process, but also to structure the extracted evidence, to categorize them. I mean, one original goal I mentioned in the beginning was that we want to give an overview of the trial, and an overview should be structured, right? And another way to structure the trial is, or the extracted information, is the effect on outcome analysis. And if we look now at the output of the current output of the argument mining pipeline, one major drawback is that the argument components are still only in human readable format. So they're still in natural language text. We have detected them, but they are still in natural language text. So the idea is to aggregate the argument components with medical annotations, so we can semi-formalize these components. And this is where the effect and outcome module actually comes in and analyzes the effect an intervention has on outcome. So for example, if the overall survival was increased or decreased. And this is then translated with Pico elements into machine processable data. And if you can see here, if you go back to the whole argument pipeline, this is an extension which works on the argument components. And practically it consists of two sub-modules. So first we have the outcome detection module, which finds the outcomes in the argument component. So this is a sequence tagging task similar to this as employed for argument component detection. So we use the same transformer architectures as in the previous experiments. The model was, however, trained on the EBMLP dataset, which is a corpus for Pico element detection. And the challenges here were the abbreviation of interventions and outcomes, and to extract or determine the exact boundaries of the outcome. So for example, if you want to find long-term postoperative intraocular pressure, or if you want to find just postoperative intraocular pressure. And so then the output of this module is then passed to the effect classifier, which actually classifies, given the outcome and the component, which effect it was, so if it was increased or decreased or one of the other classes. And this is treated as a sequence classification problem. And for this, again, transform models were evaluated on the second version of the dataset. And one of the main challenges here is if you have both trials mentioned in one component, to refer the outcome back to the right reference point. So if you have, so if the outcome was actually from the intervention or from the comparative treatment. And to show you some results, so we can see here that the base model of BERT, so the BERT trained on general Wikipedia data, performed worse. We can see an improvement here with bio and cybert, so there is a requirement of biomedical knowledge, which can be used here, which makes sense if you think about it, because with respect to the outcome detection, you have to have an idea what an outcome is in a medical sense. Also, we tested the case models where usually because case models cope better with abbreviations. But however, in this case, there does not seem to be a beneficial effect with this. So if we compare the bold numbers on the left, and if we look at the performance for each single class, we can see that they are actually well distributed. So the model did learn a good representation for each of the classes, with the exception of the no occurrence, which was with 2% strongly underrepresented in the data set. But if we add more data with that, it could actually be improved there. And in general, as I said before, there were problems with the exact boundaries of the outcome. So for example, that the word severe was missing from an adverse reaction. And the exact boundaries were also a huge topic of disagreement from the annotators. And to conclude this part then, so this effect analyzes, this effect analysis module is an extension of the argument mining pipeline, and it gives more structure to the extracted information with respect to machine readability, and it highlights important concepts. So the effects an intervention has are the central information doctors want to know. So if you as a doctor want to get a quick overview of a clinical trial, the effects of the interventions are one of the first information you're looking for. And to demonstrate further the feasibility of the proposed argument mining pipeline, I also developed a demo system, and this is ACTA, which stands for Argumentative Clinical Trial Analysis. And it was thought to be the first step in a pipeline for evidence-based decision-making. And the idea is here you want to visualize the trial abstract and therefore help in the literature exploration. So we will, when you summarize those, there's relevant information such as pico elements and contained arguments, and visualize them for the user. And I have here two screenshots. So the first one is the search function, which is the integration of the PubMed web interface, basically. So the literature search can be done exactly like on like with the PubMed tools. You can use the same query language, and the doctor should be very familiar with that. And on the bottom, you can see actually the heart of the demo system, which is a process trial. So on the right, you see the abstract, and in this abstract, you can highlight the pico elements and the argument and the found argumentative components. In the middle, you have the constructed argumentation graph, and if you hover over each single component, you can see the text of the components, and you can do that for multiple trials, which are shown on the left, where you can select it. And in later work, in the context of the COVID on the Web project, the ACTA pipeline was reused. So the idea of the project was to facilitate the access, the querying, and information processing of COVID-19 literature. And to this end, a linked dataset was created, and where once one included knowledge graph was also on the argumentative side of the literature. And this is where ACTA came into play. So for this, the functionality was extended, and the models were improved. But however, the main difference was that the output of the demo system was properly linked to ontologies, so that we formalized and the extracted information, basically. And so for itself, the arguments were represented in RDF with the AMO, Sioka, and argument interchange format ontologies. And on the other side, we have the pico elements, which were used with alignment and a linker to link them to the UMLS concepts. And if we look here at the whole project, we can see that ACTA was just a small facet here in the overall project, but I will not go into detail of the other parts. And so to finally conclude the work of my thesis, so as I said in the beginning, there were three major research questions, and to address the first questions, how one can adapt the computational models of arguments. So the answer was basically the creation of the abstract dataset with a bipolar argumentation scheme and the extension of the outcome analysis annotations. And then for the second question about the computational approaches, so I tested various methods and created domain-specific argument mining pipeline plus the extension like the effect on outcome. And the third question, which was more about the impact on the deliberation process, was addressed with a demo system and a detailed limitation analysis, which was more in the actual thesis than less in the presentation here, and which highlighted the weaknesses of the used approaches and the remaining open questions. And in general, my work opens the way for future research directions. So one important step would be the integration of external knowledge or expert knowledge. So this is not only relevant for the argument classification, because as I said before, it's not necessary if one outcome increases, you want to know if this is beneficial or not. So this can be actually modeled with external knowledge, but also it's helpful in the sense if you want to make the model explainable. So if you want to explain why there is an attack relation and not a support relation, for example. And another big direction is the expansion to compare the various trials against each other. So right now the analysis only on each single trial. And the next big step would be then to compare actually the claims of each single trial with each other in the inter-argument level. And in this direction also goes then the extension to analyze the full text of the study. As I said before, the risk factors and limitations are mainly stated in the full text body. Also, it is important that because there might be distortions of how the authors sell their study in the abstract. So they might be slightly misleading, they might be slightly overselling their work, and to find these misrepresentations and inconsistencies of the results, I would have to analyze the full text. But this also includes that we won't have to analyze then actually the numerical values and judge the numerical values of that. The last point of view, which is then also more related also to the numerical values, is an important direction to interconnect the extracted evidence for frameworks which are used for the qualitative evaluation of trials. So this is more on the clinical significance So if the observed effect is clinically actually relevant or not. And that's it. I thank you for your attention. And these are the publications related to the thesis, and I'm open for the questions now.